Ever feel like you're racing against the clock just to get everything done, like the day's not long enough?
Oh,
Yeah, we've all been there. It's this constant struggle with time. Well, in this deep dive, we're diving headfirst into some seriously actionable time management tricks straight from Brian Tracy's Time Management. We're talking pure productivity gold, no fluff.
and the thing about Tracy's approach, it's not just about squeezing more into your day, it's deeper than that. He sees time management as this whole life management thing. It's about like making your actions match what you actually care about.
Okay, I like that. It's easy to get stuck just being busy, right? But being productive is a whole other ballgame. I've definitely been there. So how does Tracy bridge that gap, going from just doing stuff to actually doing things that click with our values?
He's all about something he calls slow thinking. Basically, it's hitting pause on that daily rush and asking those big questions. What are my core values, really? What do I want out of life, both personally and professionally?
It's like checking your internal compass before charting a course, making sure you're heading in the right direction.
Spot on. And once you've got those principles locked in, you can start aligning everything you do with them.
Yeah.
Tracy uses this really cool example in the book, this woman who becomes wildly successful in business. Her secret, she made every single decision based on whether it got her closer to her long-term vision.
Wow. It's like she had this mental filter for her time. Instead of just reacting to everything that popped up, she was focused on what truly mattered.
Precisely. And that's where having a personal vision and mission statement comes in. For both your life and your work, it's like having a roadmap, a clear path guiding you. Because without it, it's easy to get lost in the everyday chaos and lose sight of the big picture.
Makes total sense. Just like using a GPS, you've got to know where you're going to figure out the best route. And speaking of routes, one of Tracy's go-to tools is the good old-fashioned to-do list. He found that almost every top executive he worked with relied on it.
And it's more than just scribbling down errands.
Yeah.
He dives into why it works so well for high achievers. It's about taking all those thoughts swirling around in your head and turning them into concrete actions.
It's like having an external hard drive for your brain, right? Freeing up mental space to focus on the bigger picture.
Exactly. He takes it a step further with his ABCDE method. Ever heard of that?
I have, but for those who haven't, what makes it so effective?
It's all about being ruthless with your priorities.
Yeah.
A, tasks are non-negotiable, the ones that have the biggest impact. Then you've got B, tasks, important but not as urgent, and so on. The key is figuring out your A tasks and putting them first every single day.
It's like laser focusing on what truly moves the needle, right? It's interesting because Tracy found that people waste a ton of time, like up to half their workday on C activities, things that might feel urgent or even fun but don't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
And it's so easy to fall into that trap, right? Checking emails every 5 seconds, scrolling through social media. It feels productive in the moment, but are you actually any closer to your goals?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that brings us to another one of Tracy's big ideas, the 80-20 rule, also known as the Pareto principle. Have you come across that one?
Absolutely. It completely changed how I think about productivity.
Tell me about it. It totally reframed my approach to work, too. So it's the idea that roughly 80% of your results come from just 20% of your efforts. So the real magic is identifying that crucial 20%, those activities that are really driving your success.
Right, and it's often not what we think. We might spend hours on things that feel super important, but are actually just distractions from the truly impactful work. Like, I actually used this principle recently. I was drowning in this project, completely overwhelmed. So I hit pause, looked at my to-do list, and realized I was wasting a ton of time on low-impact stuff.
What kind of stuff are you getting bogged down in? Everyone's got those time sucks. For me, it was getting lost in the details. I was trying to perfect every little thing before moving on. It felt productive, but it was actually slowing me way down. But once I shifted focus to the core parts of the project, that 20% that would actually determine its success, man, I was blown away by how much more I got done.
It's like those aha moments, right? When you realize where your time's really going. And sometimes, we even trick ourselves into thinking we're being productive when really we're just creatively procrastinating. And that's something Tracy talks about.
Creative procrastination. Okay, now that's interesting. Isn't all procrastination bad?
Not necessarily. Tracy's got this distinction between procrastination that comes from fear or avoidance, and then there's the kind that's actually strategic. This creative procrastination, it's like choosing to put off those low-value tasks on purpose so you free up space for the really important stuff.
So it's like that saying, eat the frog first. Tackle your biggest, ugliest task right away in the morning.
Kinda, but there's more to it. It's about really getting that difference between urgent and important. Tracy's quadrant system explains this perfectly. You've got stuff that's urgent and important. Those are your absolute must-dos. Then there's stuff that's important but not urgent. We often put those off, but they're actually crucial in the long run.
Playing the long game with your time, right? Not just fighting fires all day, but actually moving towards your goals.
I actually used creative procrastination to my advantage a while back. I had this big presentation coming up, and instead of diving right in, I decided to knock out some smaller tasks that had been on the back burner.
Interesting. You delayed the big one strategically. How'd that work out?
It was amazing. By the time I got to that presentation, my mind was clear, I had tons of energy, and even some fresh ideas because I hadn't burned myself out on the main thing. Yeah, it felt a little like procrastination at the time, but it was actually me being strategic with my energy. And speaking of energy, Tracy's a big advocate for carving out these uninterrupted blocks of time for our most important work. He says it's key to maximizing productivity. Absolutely. When you have those dedicated chunks of time free from distractions, you tap into a whole different level of focus and flow. He even suggests some pretty radical things to make it happen, like coming in early, working through lunch, even staying late, just to create those protected time zones.
Sounds a little counterintuitive, but I get it. It's about creating that laser focus that's so hard to find these days. I'll admit I was skeptical about this whole thing, but then I tried it. I had this project that needed serious concentration, so for a week I came in early every day and dedicated that quiet morning time just to that project.
That takes discipline. What happened?
It was a game changer. The quality of my work skyrocketed, and I got so much more done than I thought possible in such a short amount of time. It was like my brain finally had space to breathe and make connections.
That's exactly the flow state that Tracy's talking about. But a big part of getting into that flow is about what you eliminate, not just what you add. He's got a whole chapter on conquering interruptions, and for good reason.
Oh, tell me about it. It feels like a never-ending stream of emails, phone calls, people popping in.
Exactly.
Ah.
Every interruption, even the tiny ones, breaks your concentration and makes your brain switch gears, which takes time and energy.
So how do we deal with it? Become hermits and hide from the world.
Tempting, right? But not exactly practical. We need actual strategies. One of Tracy's best tips is this idea of batching tasks. Instead of constantly switching between different types of work, you group similar activities together and tackle them all at once.
So instead of checking email all day long, you set aside specific blocks of time for your inbox.
Exactly. Same goes for phone calls, meetings, even creative tasks. When you batch similar activities, you cut down on those disruptive context switches and let your brain really get into a groove.
It's like creating these mini deadlines within your day, which can be super motivating. And since we're talking distractions, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the smartphone in our pockets. They're supposed to connect us, but half the time they're just distracting us.
Totally. It all comes down to setting boundaries for ourselves and the people around us. Tracy's got some really simple but effective ways to manage the phone monster, like having an assistant screen your calls, using voicemail strategically, and being clear about when you're actually available by phone.
Right. It's about training people to interact with us in a way that respects our time and energy. It's funny how we've become slaves to these devices that were supposed to make life easier, right?
The irony of the digital age. Speaking of time wasters, we can't forget about meetings. They can be like black holes of productivity, leaving you drained and no further along.
Meetings, don't get me started. It's like they multiply overnight, taking over our calendars and leaving zero time for actual work.
Tracy's got this really interesting take on meetings. He says to treat every single one like it's a business investment.
A business investment. Okay, I like where this is going.
It makes you think, right? What's the potential return on investment for this meeting? What's the clear purpose, the desired outcome, and is it really worth everyone's time and energy?
So no more meetings just for the sake of meeting. No more sitting through presentations that could have been an email.
In a perfect world, right.
Ugh.
But if a meeting's truly necessary, Tracy's got ways to make them more efficient. Having a clear agenda, starting and ending on time, keeping the attendee list to the bare minimum, those little things can make a huge difference.
It's about respecting everyone's time, treating it like the valuable resource it is. And speaking of valuable resources, what about information? We're bombarded with it constantly. Emails, articles, social media, reports. It's so easy to feel overwhelmed and waste precious time trying to keep up.
It's the double-edged sword of the information age. We've got more knowledge at our fingertips than ever, but it can feel impossible to stay on top of it all. Tracy calls this information overload, and he says it's one of the biggest threats to our productivity.
Okay, so what's the solution? Do we disconnect and go live in a cave?
I know, right? Sounds tempting, but not really practical. Instead, Tracy emphasizes becoming incredibly selective about what we let into our minds. He suggests things like speed reading, batching our reading material, and this really cool technique he calls rip and read for magazines and articles.
Rip and read. Okay, that's a new one. Tell me more.
It's deceptively simple. For articles or magazines, instead of reading every single word, you scan for the main points. You literally rip out or flag the sections with the most relevant info and just focus on those. It's about being ruthless with your time and attention.
It's like having the right tools for the job, right? You can have all the motivation in the world, but if you're not working with the best tools or sharpening them regularly, you're not going to reach your full potential. Which brings us to another thing Tracy talks about, personal development.
Yeah. And he's not talking about some vague self-help stuff. He means actively investing in yourself, expanding your knowledge, your skills, so you become even more valuable, even more effective in your work.
Sharpening the saw, right. And he gives you some really concrete ways to do that. It's not just about hoping you'll get better. It's about actually taking action.
Totally. He breaks it down into steps you can actually use. Reading books and articles, listening to podcasts, wink, wink, attending those seminars and workshops, finding mentors in your field. He even talks about joining a mastermind group, those groups of like-minded people who push each other to grow.
Surrounding yourself with people who want to be their best. That's powerful stuff. And it makes me think about another big theme in Tracy's work balance. It's easy to get so caught up in being productive that we forget to actually take care of ourselves and nurture the other parts of our lives.
He's a big believer that real success goes beyond just achievements. It's about having a life you actually enjoy, one that includes your health, your relationships, your mental well-being.
It's about having a life you don't need to escape from, which means prioritizing things like exercise, relaxation, quality time with people you care about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He reminds us that, hey, we're not going to live forever. Our time is precious. We shouldn't be so busy chasing success that we forget to actually live. He mentions this wise old doctor who said, "I've never met a businessman on his deathbed who wished he'd spent more time at the office."
Man, that really makes you think. At the end of the day, it's not just about what you get done, it's about how you live your life.
Couldn't agree more. And that brings us back to this idea that time management is really life management. It's about making smart choices, about how you spend your time, aligning it with your values, your goals, the kind of life you really want to live.
So for our listeners who are ready to take charge of their time, to take charge of their lives, what's the big takeaway from Brian Tracy's time management?
Time management is a skill. And like any skill, you can learn it, you can master it. It's not about finding more time. It's about using the time you have better, being intentional, being strategic, and not being afraid to cut out what's not working.
It's about designing your days, designing your life in a way that reflects what truly matters to you. One last thought from Brian Tracy that's really stuck with me. If you achieved all your professional goals, but your health and relationships fell apart along the way, would it really be worth it?
It's a question worth asking yourself. Think about it, and then use these strategies we've talked about to create that balanced, successful life you deserve.
Love it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you in the next one.